Good afternoon, my name is Dr. Janko. I'm president of the Eurasia Center. I welcome you here today at the National Press Club. Ralph Winnie is a member of the National Press Club. He's also our Vice President of Global Business Development and also our Director on China. Today we have a very special event. Carter Andress has written a book, Victory Undone. And I would want to stress that this is our first of a series of international security forum events. We've been doing a lot of security work with Russia and Eurasia before, and this is going to be a new series, so look in your emails and we'll get more and more people to come. As we see in the world today, the world is in crisis. As the president of the Eurasia Center, Eurasia is in crisis. And I was born on December 7th, not 1941, but it kind of made me a reader of history. And today I see the world as a global village. But it was always a global village, just people never communicated with each other. They never interacted. Cultures never interacted until the age of the explorers. Christopher Columbus, Magellan, they started interacting with different peoples, different cultures, and there was clashes of civilizations. That process continued over the last 600 years until December 7th, when we had the First World War was in 1918 and engulfed most of the world as we know it. The Second World War happened in 1939, and that engulfed most of the world as we know it. But today, the crisis is happening in the Ukraine and Iraq. There's problems in North Korea. We are focusing at these issues around the globe, and this is a unique opportunity for us to highlight somebody who has been in Iraq, has seen it firsthand, and has written a book and wants to share with you his observations. But before I say that, I wanted to introduce a very special guest here. Stuart Bowen has been the Inspector General in Iraq for a number of years, and he's here to introduce the author. So without any ado, I'd like to introduce Stuart Bowen.
Thank you, Troy. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for being here on a very auspicious occasion for a number of reasons. First and foremost, full disclosure, Carter Andress is a very good friend of mine and has been for a long time, and so I bear him a lot of personal affection, but also a great deal of professional admiration for the work that he's done for his country, both as an Army officer, a Ranger, but most notably and significantly over the last 10 years, his commitment to this new era of engagement that Gerard was talking about in Iraq and Afghanistan. This engagement with a new threat that's, as the news today tells us from Baghdad, is as lethal and dangerous as ever. Perhaps worse than ever. I was with Ambassador Luqman Faili, the ambassador from Iraq now to the United States, and he said this is the worst moment in Iraq in over 100 years. And I think he's right. And Carter's book gets into why. But what I love about his book is the what of his experience, because I was there too. Carter and I met 30 years ago at the University of the South, Sewanee, Tennessee, about as far from Baghdad as you can get in not just distance but life. It's a grove of academe. It's a peaceful spot. It's a wonderful place to learn and grow. But I think he and I both did our real growing in Iraq over the last 10 years. I spent 9.5 as the Special Inspector General there, and so I felt it. But as I have said about this book, if you want to know what it felt like to be in Iraq over the last 10 years, in the grimy throes of grit and challenge and danger and success, as his company realized, then you need to read this book because it takes you there. and is very, very compelling. And I underscore success, because at this moment when you look at Iraq, that's a word far removed from your thinking, from our thinking, right? Because of the collapse since June 10th, and with the fall of Mosul, and the growth of ISIL's capacity. But what can't be erased in spite of that collapse is the success that so many hardworking, committed servants, I would say, like Carter and his company, accomplished from 2004 through 2010, 2011. And George Orwell, one of my favorite authors, said, "Requires a constant struggle to see what's right in front of your face." And right in front of our face over the last 10 years is the reality that we have a new breed as part of our national security architecture, and that breed is the contractor combatant. And the prototype, the archetype, a leader of that new breed is here to speak to you now, my friend Carter Andress.
Really appreciate you all coming today. That's a tough act to follow. Stuart Bowen, one of the true heroes of the Iraq conflict. I mean, this is a man who brought transparency to the battlefield in contracting. Over 100 bad actors convicted. Recovery of over $1 billion of taxpayer money. Testified, wrote quarterly in front of Congress. Probably wrote the best written government publication ever, Hard Lessons from Iraq. It's actually well written and with a whole lot of footnotes. I'd also like to thank the Eurasia Center, one of a rising center of national security information in the debate, unencumbered, unentangled by special interest, as we find a lot of the institutions in Washington, D.C. are. As a young infantry officer, I was taught to put the bottom line up front. So let's start out with the bottom line, because what we've titled the talk today is The Way Forward Against ISIS for the United States. The key here, if we look at this, so we're talking about a strategic plan. And I tend more towards the Clausewitzian strategy here, which is the use of engagement battle on the battlefield to win war. But also, there's elements here of grand strategy, as Sam Williamson talks about, Professor Sam Williams talks about in The Politics of Grand Strategy, which is economic, cultural, diplomatic, not just military. Of course, I won't touch so much on the politics aspect of it, but I think what I'm going to propose today is something that the American people would support. The polls are telling us so. There's a requirement for action in Iraq now and Syria. And I would think that the most important aspect, because we have to deal with the reality of the leadership here in the United States, national security leadership, there will not be U.S. ground troops. And I think we can do it without U.S. ground troops. When I speak of U.S. ground troops, I'm talking about maneuver units, 82nd Airborne, 1st Armored Division, on the battlefield. There's going to be a requirement for special operators, forward air controllers. I mean, we just have to have that kind of force multiplier out there to really be effective with what is really our contribution to this campaign, which has to involve both Syria and Iraq, which is our air power contribution, along with our ability to train as no other nation on earth can train. But the real way to defeat this new mutation of Al-Qaeda, going back to 9/11, is by bringing regional actors into play here, on the ground, fellow Muslims on the ground, in Syria specifically. The key player here, as I propose, is Turkey. Now the Turks are asking for something from us, and that puts us in a bit of a bargaining position. They're asking for Al-Assad or as we would say, Assad, dictator of Syria, to go. And we can do this. And if we do that, what is the bargain with us between us and the Turks? Well, the Turks are going to come in, Kosovo style, and occupy Syria, along with Saudi contributions and other Islamic nations' contributions. I think we're in that position that we can establish that. Now that's where the opportunity is here. But let's talk about why do we need to defeat ISIS rapidly. Well, for one thing, we now have a state, a terrorist state, in the middle of the Arabian Peninsula, on the doorstep of Europe. It's unimaginable. It's unimaginable to me. And when Mosul fell in June, as Stuart referenced, I still grapple with that. I'm sure we all are. But nevertheless, we have to act. So this terrorist state, Al-Qaeda state, which I'll argue is Al-Qaeda state, direct lineage going back to 9/11 and bin Laden, has drawn thousands of Western passport holders, potential terrorists, and in turn it's also, because now once again Al-Qaeda is on the march, it's inspired lone wolf actions that we've seen in Canada, and we saw at Fort Hood, even before this happened. So we have to, if we allow this caliphate, this terrorist jihadi state, to continue to exist and offer safe haven on the border of Turkey, then we will see terrorism in Europe, and then we'll see terrorism in the United States. And the immediate impact of terrorism in Europe, not only upon the Europeans, our allies, and many of us have connections with Europe, of course, the human condition there, the impact on humanity in Europe, but it would damage us economically. If we look back to what happened in 9/11, we lost $1 trillion of net value in our economy in one day. In one day. Not to speak of the cost of the TSA and Department of Homeland Security and the war in Afghanistan and the war in Iraq, all these things, the tremendous cost. And we're suffering a painfully slow economic recovery right now. So I think we have many real reasons, fundamental reasons, why we need to act against Al-Qaeda, its caliphate in Syria and northern Iraq. Now, what I bring today is 4 years of experience on the ground in Iraq during the war. I lived in Baghdad. I've traveled to almost every city in Iraq. Most of the work that we did, over 90 projects, most of the construction work, was in the Sunni Triangle, in areas that were directly threatened by Al-Qaeda. And my workforce, we averaged 1,000 employees on any given day, and my workforce was 80 to 90% Iraqi. I traveled over 15,000 miles around Iraq during the war. And my security team were all Iraqis, Arabs and Kurds. I might have had one Lebanese guy with me. I mean, these people could have turned me into Al-Qaeda at any moment in time and gotten multiples of their monthly salary. I mean, the going rate for somebody like me was at least $100,000. And we paid well, but it wasn't even close to that for our security guys. So we shared with the Iraqis, and that's kind of the positive message. If you can boil down my book, Victory Undone, into one message, it is that Americans and Iraqis, Westerners and Muslims, can work together in the most extreme, dangerous situations and create positive things together. And that's what we did with my Iraqis. And we employed, my company, American-Iraqi Solutions Group, we employed over 10,000 Iraqis, Sunni, Shia, Kurd, and accomplished over $400 million worth of work in Iraq during the war. So, I believe that I bring something here to the debate to try to contribute, and was called to write this book. It wasn't a book I really wanted to write. I've got a master's in history, and I wanted to write a real history book, that I was going to take 10 years to write, the classic, all the footnotes and all the documents, but they go into that. But this, first of all, the title was initially going to be Untold Victory, because what we did in Iraq during the war, we won that war. I mean, when I left Iraq full time, January 2009, Al-Qaeda was gone. We had almost 1 million Iraqi security men under arms. We were going towards our 3rd democratic election certified by the United Nations. I could take cat naps driving around Al-Anbar. I mean, we were down to, there were many months that went by that we had 0 combat fatalities for U.S. soldiers on the ground in Iraq. And then the Arab Spring. But let's talk, if I could talk just a minute about, how we defeated Al-Qaeda. And for that matter, Iran and Sadr and the Sadr's militias. We went in fully committed into Iraq. I mean, and we can debate about the reasons for the Iraq War, and I believe that there could be other opinions that have validity. And obviously, I'm not omniscient in all this. But I think that we saw with the New York Times article last week about the buried weapons of mass destruction, the chemical warfare capability that the Iraqis retained even after Saddam was hung in the ground, and have, the leader of the neo-Saddamists, who are the main supporters of ISIS in northern Iraq, is Izzat al-Duri, who was, some say, Saddam's right-hand man. He was the king of clubs in the infamous deck during the war. So does he know where they're located? No one handled special weapons in Iraq without Saddam and his immediate circle having knowledge of that. So we defeated Al-Qaeda in Iraq with a massive reconstruction campaign overseen by Stuart Bowen and participated in by my American-Iraqi Solutions Group. That was a real commitment. In that commitment, we employed hundreds of thousands of Iraqis in positive construction projects, service projects, and security-related projects. We installed the first democratically elected country government in Arab history in Baghdad. That was always the focus of our mission there from the beginning. Pushed a little bit by Sistani, Ayatollah Sistani in the beginning with the CPA, but nevertheless, this was the mission of the U.S. to install a democracy in Iraq. And we did that. We've had 4 democratic elections, including the 4th one where Maliki, the prime minister, had won a 3rd term, but he stepped down due to international pressure. This inspired, I believe, a belief amongst the people that created the safe haven for Al-Qaeda in Iraq. The Sunni Arabs, especially of Al-Anbar province in the west. There were Sunnis involved in Maliki's government. There were Shias, of course, Shia involved, and Kurds. And we saw this, I can remember going out to Habaniya, which is a resort town between Ramadi and Fallujah. And the first time I went out there at the end of 2006, the recruits there, this is the first recruit training base in Al-Anbar that the new Iraqi army had. The soldiers were singing in sync, in step, beautiful songs. And they were all about Muqtada Sadr. And so I was like, oh, we're doomed now. I mean, imagine, all we can bring is Shia troops in Anbar. Yeah, so you know what's going to happen. This is a recipe for failure. Well, next time I went out, the beginning of 2007, about 45 days later, the Sahwa recruits had showed up. There were cohorts of Bedouin Sunni Arabs joining a Shia-led army funded and allied by the U.S. and allied with the U.S. I was scared. Although first time, I'd been scared around Iraqi army soldiers because these guys were serious desert warriors. And what the beautiful thing about it is here were the tribes of Anbar committing their children, their young men, and in some cases, young women. We actually built the first Iraqi police training camp for female police officers outside of Cuba. It was heartening. You could see it turning. You could see it turning. When I saw that, I knew the end was coming. Then, in one of the, I think, almost Lincoln-esque decisions, a courageous decision by George W. Bush to do the search. Right? His General George Casey, who was his commander in Iraq, was saying, no, we need to pull out and leave it to the Iraqis, ready or not. Congress had turned, Democratic based on, a lot of tales in the beginning. This was going to be quick and easy, and we were going to find all these weapons of mass destruction programs and whatnot. So the American, and then we were looking at the battlefield here from the U.S. and seeing that these men are dying, men and women are dying, servicemen and women dying out there in the battlefield, and what progress are we making? So you can understand why the American people were turning against the war. But President Bush made the decision to go in even further and commit additional troops, another 40,000 troops, which was necessary, to give the Iraqis time and space to develop the security services that were necessary to defeat Al-Qaeda. Then, amazing thing about being from the United States is the industrial base we have here is incredible. I mean, we were able to identify a problem on the battlefield, the #1 killer of U.S. troops, improvised explosive devices, basically roadside bombs, and we created a whole new type of armored vehicle, the MRAP, the mine-resistant armor protected vehicle, which we built most of their facilities for maintenance on there. This negated the jihadis' sole militarily effective weapon. And that was the IED. Then, the thing that the greatest force multiplier, I believe, that we have on the battlefield is signal intelligence. We had the security contract for Iraq and a cell phone, nationwide in Iraq. It's one of the very successful free market reforms that was done on the CPA, and an Egyptian company won the bidding, largest Egyptian company, Euroscom International, on the Cairo Stock Exchange. So you can imagine it was a big deal. You have a Sunni Egyptian company running the biggest commercialized project and the cell network in Iraq. We secured and helped install cell towers throughout Al-Anbar. Ramadi, Fallujah, Heat, Haditha, these names, these are the names, that was the heartland of what became Al-Qaeda in Iraq and what was the main support for the Baathists, the Neo-Saddamists, part of the element that we were confronting in the insurgency. And I always wondered, first of all, why did they not destroy these towers? I mean, these were literally, 15, 20 foot tall. They had a generator next to them to run power on them, and no real security. We would rent them from some fellahin, some farmer's house, and install them on his roof or next to his roof. And I was wondering, why did they not, destroy these? I mean, this is the sign of, progress, which of course the jihadis are opposed to progress. Well, the jihadis wanted to be able to talk on their cell phones. So, and then I said, well, we let them talk on their cell phones, right? Well, why don't we go in and keep them from talking on their cell phones? Well, of course, NSA wanted to listen to them talking on their cell phones. So, I'm sleeping in my bed every night, trying to sleep in my bed every night in Mansour district in western Baghdad for in 2007, 2008, and we're right in the flight line between JSOC, Delta Force, and Abu Ghraib and Ramadi and out west, right? So every night, here came helicopters, blacked out, flying 10, 15, 20 feet over the top of my tower I had on top of the house. Every night, sometimes 6, 7, 8 flights. And what was happening was they were hitting one guy, they were getting his cell phone, they were punching it up in the NSA, and they were hitting, in some cases, as it talks about in Stanley McChrystal's book, they were hitting 4, 5, and 6 guys on that contact list that came up on the social network, right, diagram, same night. I mean, that was it. Al-Qaeda was gone in Baghdad. They were gone. So in the end, there was true victory in Iraq. And we defeated our greatest enemy, Al-Qaeda there. And in the process, conservatively estimated, we killed 20 to 30,000 Al-Qaeda operatives and supporters in Iraq. What we created in Iraq was what I call the field of dream strategy, which is build it and they will come. Because were they going to come and attack the United States when we were there in Baghdad, in the heartland of the Abbasid Caliphate that they wanted to rebuild? No, they were going to come at us there. But it was different for people going, women and children and men going to work and going about their business like on 9/11. When they came to Iraq, they were coming after us. And they were coming after us, and we were the army and armed contractors. So it was a whole different scenario when they attacked us there. Now, how did we get to where we are now? And there's been a lot of, this has really been interesting because I talk about it in my book. There's been a lot of talk about the Status of Forces Agreement and our failure to obtain a Status of Forces Agreement. So there's nothing for me new here to say about that, other than my own personal perspective on it. I was dealing with, dealing with the Iraqi army on the ground as much as we did. And, I think Leon Panetta lays it out in his book that, the White House didn't want a Status of Forces Agreement. He was Secretary of Defense at the time. So if anybody's going to know that, other than the people in the White House themselves, it's going to be him. So I take him at his word. And I think we've learned the lesson too in Afghanistan, where we're going with the BSA, the Bilateral Syria Agreement, which leaves behind the U.S. military. So this, really in essence, what we've done here is, and I'm gonna use some historical analogies here, and they're not precise. It's like when I was getting my master's, I worked at the National Archives, and on the front door of the National Archives, there's past prologue. It's context. It gives us information to draw, conclusions on, because every event in the future is unique, and what's going on in the present right now. But could you imagine if we had left militarily South Korea 2 years after we defeated the Chinese and North Koreans? What would have happened to South Korea? It would not survive today. And same thing happened in Iraq. Now we had, we're not, it's like I said, it's an imperfect analogy, but it makes one think about, the commitment we made in blood and treasure, 4,500 soldiers killed, tens of billions of dollars invested, and that, and I was there when the last soldiers pulled out. And, and as a former Army officer, I knew they were targets. And, Sadr and Iran were going to continue after them. And so, in a sense, I felt a sense of relief that they were gone. Well, what we did, which I think is the true error here, is we pulled out the CIA in 2012. We had one of the largest, if not the largest, intelligence stations in Iraq, in Baghdad, and we pulled out. So we left the Iraqis blind, because nobody has our intelligence capabilities. No one does. To the point that when the jihadis were operating in Western Iraq in 2014, we did not provide them with the information about where they were. We didn't even call up Maliki and say, hey, they're here, here, and here, and here, because, like I said, they like to talk on their cell phones, so we knew where they were. And even more painful for those of us, that and for all of us, I think, as Americans, is we left the Iraqi army half-trained. We trained the Iraqi army in counterinsurgency tactics, okay, which is up-armored policing with some SWAT tactics thrown in. It's not combined arms, as we say in the military. It's not the type of tactics that you need to engage an invading army, because let us remember this. This event in North Iraq did not emerge out of Iraq. This is not an internal insurgency. This came from Syria. This was an invasion. Certainly they took advantage of the fissures that were evident in Iraq between the Sunni and the Shia. So were they ready to fight infantry battles? Was the Iraqi army with no air support? I mean, we left them with no air force, practically. No air force. And no strategic defense. Because none of us believed that we would leave Iraq without U.S. security support, strategic support, support from external invasion. I mean, Robert Menendez, senator, chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, keeps the Apaches. The Apache helicopters, probably the most effective ground aircraft there is, from being delivered to Iraq. We're not sure why. He told us why, but I'm not sure why. But can you imagine that? I can't. So what we've done here, right? What we did was we left the first democracy in the Arab world alone. The Shias hadn't ruled, in the Arab world since the Fatimid Caliphate, in the Middle Ages. And what was the number one way for changing government in the Middle East, in the Arab world? Military coup. Okay? And in Iraq specifically, 1958, 1963, 1968, the changes of government from the beginning when they overthrew the Sunni minority monarch that was installed by the British was by who had the tank battalions. One tank battalion overthrew the government of Iraq. So here we have a new Shia government, fragile democracy, and the enemy is within. So what are you going to do if you're prime minister of Iraq? You're going to coup-proof the army, right? I mean, because no one ever thought, we were going to get an invasion to come in. So that's what Maliki did. He coup-proofed the army. He took every Sunni leader in key combat units and replaced him with his people. To protect himself, one of the senior members currently of the Iraqi government, and I'll leave his name unsaid because it's a close friend told me about this, during the CPA, he came up to him, he was at the embassy, and he said, well, when things are really rough, we were having trouble with the Jaffrey government and whatnot, he said, what would you think if we did a coup? Now he's a senior member, he's representing the Sunnis in the government of Iraq right now. So this is real. This is no fantasy on Maliki's part, the potential for the coup. Now, also, where is he going to get strategic security support from if the U.S. has denied it to him? He's going to turn to Iran. Of course. We forced him to turn to Iran.